Democratic Congressman Colin Allred of the 32nd District, thank you so much for joining us. As you know, it's been a year since the deadly assault on the U.S. Capitol. You were right in the middle of it. What's going through your mind today?
Well, I'm reflecting on what nearly happened in our country, what did happen. I think it's one of the darkest days in our history, but hopefully it can be a chance for us to look back on how close we came to losing our democracy and commit together, Republicans, Independents, Democrats, to try to make sure that nothing like this ever happens again.
You were there. I mean, you were on the House floor, if I remember correctly. So take us back to those moments, if you can.
Well, I knew it was going to be a long day, knew it was going to be a tough day, but obviously had no idea that it would turn out the way that it did. And ultimately, we came very close to having a mass violence event, basically, that would have been terrible for the country, terrible for our history, but it was very, very close. And I don't know that people understand how close we came to something like that happening. And ultimately, we were able to escape thanks to the bravery of the Capitol Police and the DC Metro Police. But it really should not have come down to that. This should have never gotten this far.
I mean, you were in the room. Can you set the scene for me? I mean, what you were doing at the time when you heard all of the commotion start? What did you do, to try to protect yourself before you were escorted out?
Well, we had a limited number of people on the House floor. So members of the leadership team, which I'm a part of, and the state that was being challenged. In this case, it was Arizona. And we were having a debate over the Arizona election, which was fair and should not have been challenged, in my opinion, when the debate was interrupted. And we were told that the Capitol had been breached, that tear gas was being deployed in the rotunda, and to reach under our seats for gas masks that I honestly didn't even know were there. I took off my coat, was prepared to fight. We locked the doors, barred them. I thought there was no way out.
I can't imagine how scary that must have been.
Well, it was tough because my wife was at home with our 23-month-old, not even yet 2-year-old son, and was 8 months pregnant with our second son. And so I was thinking, whether or not I was ever going to be able to meet my son, and whether my son Jordan would ever get to know me. And so I texted my wife, whatever happens, I love you, because I really didn't know what was going to happen. And I honestly thought at that point that as one of the younger, former NFL linebackers, there, that I was going to have to, defend some of the folks in the chamber. Thankfully, thanks to the bravery, and I really mean this, of the Capitol Police, they found a way for us to get out. And that was through tremendous heroism on their part that we were able to escape.
So let me ask you, could this happen again, or has enough been done at the U.S. Capitol to prevent that?
Well, I think on the security side, there's no chance of this happening again. We also have to say, though, that the president of the United States at the time waited 187 minutes before he did anything to try and call off the attack, did not deploy the National Guard, in my opinion, quickly enough. The Capitol was left mostly unprotected that day, despite some pretty clear evidence that it may come under some kind of attack. And so we also won't have leadership, I hope, ever in place again that is not interested in defending the Capitol. But we have made changes, and there will be no repeat of January 6th in terms of the actual success of it getting into the Capitol.
And you brought up an interesting point. There was a lot of intelligence in the days leading up to this day 1 year ago. And there seems to have been a lack of action, taking the intelligence and then acting on it. Why was that the case? And I mean, do you have the answers on all that? And do some of the, like Speaker Pelosi, does she need to be questioned about this as well?
I think it's ridiculous to think that this is the Speaker's responsibility. The Speaker and the Senate Majority Leader, who at the time was Mitch McConnell, have joint oversight over what happens in terms of the Capitol Police, but we're not responsible for the National Guard, and there's an entire security plan that has to be executed really by the President of the United States and by the federal government. We know how to protect the Capitol. We just did not do it. If you look back to some of the protests over the course of the summer, and see the enormous police presence, the enormous National Guard presence that was there then, and you see the lack of that on January 6th, you can see that there was a difference in terms of the way it was being treated by the administration and by the president.
And so, what answers are you hoping that the January 6th committee comes up with specific to what you just said?
Well, there has to be accountability. There has to be accountability for why this was allowed to happen, but also for the folks who organized this, who called for this, and who directed it. Because there's the only way for us to heal and come back together as a country is for us to honestly discuss what happened, make sure it never happens again, and have accountability for those who created this enormous crisis in our democracy that led to police officers dying, over 140 injured, that tried to interrupt the counting and the certification of an American presidential election. That's the first time it's ever happened in our country. This is the first time we've not had a peaceful transfer of power in our nation's history. The folks who did that, who organized that, who led it, should be held to account.
Was there any organized effort? I mean, I haven't seen it yet. The United States Justice Department says 725 people have been prosecuted so far. Obviously, their investigations are continuing. I haven't seen anything where they're filing charges against anybody for sedition or actual organization. Are you aware of, any organized event by former President Trump or any of his, people in the leadership team from the White House or his campaign?
Well, it's clear from the January 6th Special Committee's investigation that the president's team was involved with the organizing of this event. Certainly the words of the president himself, calling his supporters to be there on the 6th, telling them it was going to be wild, then telling them to march on the Capitol and that they would never take their country back through weakness. Those alone are, I think, enough to say that he incited this. But we have to get into the actual, the organizing, the documents surrounding it, the discussions behind it. That's the hard work of prosecution. That's the hard work that has to be done by that committee. And we're being stonewalled by the folks who are involved in it. I do want to see the Department of Justice, though, go after the organizers. The folks who were in the building certainly need to be held to account. But in many ways, they were there at the calling and at the discretion of the folks who organized this and who wanted this. Maybe not every single part of it, but who certainly made it possible.
And that they have more power, the Justice Department prosecutors, than does the January 6th committee. Is that right?
Right. Yeah,
So
I mean, there's a subpoena power that the Congress has, but the subpoena still has to ultimately be enforced by the Department of Justice. And in this case, the Department of Justice is the right one in terms of getting access to the information, in terms of getting the testimony, the documents. That's the right investigative body that should be looking into this and holding to account the organizers. I believe that may be going on, but I think it's been going a little bit too slowly, to be honest, for my liking.
have you made your opinion known to the Attorney General?
Well, I saw the Attorney General's speech recently in which he committed to going after everyone who was involved, including the organizers. But I hope that occurs more quickly because I do think that we're running out of time. And I also think in many ways that the public narrative has been allowed to be taken over by misinformation about what happened. And some of that could be dispelled by an open and fair trial in which the evidence is presented, defense is presented as well, and the American people, as well as the decision makers in that trial, can reach a verdict.
I did have one other question for you, Congressman, and I appreciate your time. I was going back through the federal court database, and of the 725 people nationally who are being prosecuted, I've counted so far 65 from Texas. It may be 67. We're still trying to figure that out. 22 or maybe as many as 24 from North Texas. 37 of those with felony charges. What's your thought about that?
Yeah. Well, I don't know if it's still the case, but I know at one point the Dallas FBI field office is the one that made the most arrests of anyone who'd been in the Capitol that day. That might not still be true, but we certainly have a problem with extremism in Texas, and we have to tackle that. We need to have leaders who try to unite us instead of who try to appeal to those fringe elements and really kind of exacerbate some of the tensions that we know exist in our state. But we are a great state. And I know that most Texans don't feel this way. And that most Texans believe in our democracy. Most Texans, I think, looked on the events of January 6th with shame. So I don't think it's reflective of who we are.
Democratic Congressman Colin Allred, thank you so much for joining us on this day. We really do appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Jack.